I miss arcades, man. While I never got to spend much formative time with them in my youth, I still owe a lot to them in retrospect. The energy of a space occupied by dozens of strangers with a shared interest in games, cabinets' physical presence as otherworldly monoliths to a kid of my size, the list goes on. Even beyond the physicality of arcades not quite carrying over to home setups, it's also easy to see a shift in how games themselves were designed as arcades went out of favor and console gaming became the norm. Naturally, this wasn't a change that happened overnight. Arcades clearly laid the groundwork for console gaming to eventually expand and evolve from, and even smaller modern releases continue to carry on their legacy decades later, but it's hard to ignore that certain broad sensibilities were lost along the way. One such trend that's fallen out of favor is limited life systems, and by extension, the harsh punishments that can come from that element of design. Growing up with many games that came out before and during my youth, I think this was something I subconsciously noticed about older titles, but generally just viewed with a mild shrug. I always thought, well, that's just how games were back then, and put the onus on me to improve and get to a point where I could beat these old games. Titles that once stood as impossible tests of strength eventually felt more and more manageable, and with time I was eventually able to clear even my toughest demons. Some of my fondest gaming memories came not from seeing the advancement of technology grow before my eyes, but from beating what I never dreamed I was capable of. Now that I'm sitting here writing this, I'm guessing that may be where my continued interest in absurd challenges and difficult games came from, and why I'm constantly pushing myself in really dumb ways that my friends question to this day. I can't even imagine how my taste in games today might be different had my initial interactions with the medium not been molded in the way that they were. As you may expect, I was quite shocked to discover as I grew up that these trends weren't as popular as I expected. Over the years, many modern critics have begun to question limited lives and their place in gaming, often maligning them as nothing but an outdated relic of a bygone era, an era where arcade operators just wanted to squeeze extra money out of impressionable children, and didn't care about providing quality pieces of entertainment. In reality, it shouldn't be too surprising. After all, the bloating of games once they reached home consoles meant it wouldn't be reasonable to design a AAA big-budget game like that anymore. Similarly, post-arcade releases slowly started leaning away from actively scoring the player during the duration of the game, also to the delight of consumers. Obviously, these don't belong in every game, but what detractors of these fail to understand is how these can benefit games that include them. Even in games that seem simple on the surface, there can be a surprising number of complex layers that get added to play when built around these two systems. Scoring on its own may be an explicitly intrinsic reward when viewed in a vacuum, but what happens when you're granted extra lives for getting high scores? Suddenly the thought of working towards mastery over basic mechanics can be a bit more alluring, especially in titles where one extra life can be the determining factor between continuing to play the game or being forced to spend more of your parents' money. Depending on the game, you may also realize there's been a lot of consideration for how scoring itself is handled, and once you've crossed that hurdle, it's not just about bragging rights anymore. At this point, you've essentially unlocked a whole new slew of mechanics and challenges to play with in a title you may have disregarded before. As it turns out, these old games weren't just a ploy to steal your money, they were designed by real people trying to make their game a more exciting and complete package than whatever other games were sharing space in the arcade. These hidden layers of design can be found all over arcade games waiting for the curious player to discover, and one genre that feels absolutely rich for this type of exploration is the shoot 'em up, which I'll be calling shmups from now on for brevity. These games tend to be so challenging for most players that the only reasonable way towards the elusive 1cc is to earn extra lives or extends through skillful use of the game's scoring systems. Technically these aren't required for completion, but in many games it would be unreasonable for the average player to get by without eventually crumbling under pressure and making mistakes. While you may not be able to read every single bullet pattern that gets thrown your way even after many hours of play, if you engage with the scoring system, you'll likely have a bit more room for error and have a far greater chance of reaching the end. While these games may seem insurmountable at a glance, these truly are titles that anyone can learn and get into with enough determination and perseverance. That said, I think there's extra room for these games to blossom and evolve even more than they already have since their inception. Standard shmups are often complex but somewhat linear pieces of artistry. Interesting offensive mechanics may throw wrinkles into the equation and force players to consider each scenario with many possible solutions, but due to the relative rigidity of bullet patterns and enemy layouts, you could reasonably find an optimal path through and solve the game with enough time, dedication, and study. There's obviously a certain beauty in that, ascending to match the piece on its level and finally seeing through the canvas between the splashes of painted bullets that get in the way of your success. It's one of the more literal ways you can use games as a vessel for artistic expression, and there's absolutely value in that. The only problem is that at a certain point, the core of the game can shift from a problem-solving affair to an execution check. Obviously, this type of gameplay has its own appeal, and my simplified summary doesn't account for tertiary methods of play. Competing for high scores against other players is something that can extend the life of a game for decades after its release, and that doesn't even account for the mountain of a journey to even reach a point of mastery in this genre to begin with. It's just that in their traditional implementation, I don't find them to be the best vehicles for pure player freedom and expression in the medium of games. On that note, I think it's unfortunate, albeit understandable to a certain degree, that Battle Garegga is the title that slipped under the radar for most. Raizing! Its initial facade of an industrial war-grounded aesthetic is relatively unassuming paired next to the galactic ambitions and more popular shooters, and at a glance it's hard to parse its mechanics any further than it sure is a shmup. The irony here is that once you peel back your preconceptions on the game and really dig into its cavernous depths, this is by far one of the most enchanting takes on the genre you can find. If traditional shmups are more about knowing what the game is about to say than what your actual response is, then Battle Garegga is all about constant back and forth exchanges where making a poor decision may blow up in your face with no easy way to bounce back. It's an active conversation, seamlessly flowing between leading roles of command and brief moments of reprieve to consider your next plan of attack. Few games of any genre have truly captured this feeling for me, let alone shmups, but what's really surprising is that it doesn't do anything really complex on the surface to demand this type of engagement. There are many different selectable ships that can fuzzy up decision making during runs, but bullet patterns can be easier to read than what you may expect from your average cave affair, your secondary attack options are multifaceted but still pretty easy to understand, and bombs mostly work how you'd expect for a shmup. Altogether, I find this makes the game easy to enjoy on a baseline level, but those elements alone are not what set it far above the pack for me. Rather, the defining element to Battle Garegga is its infamous ranking system, essentially this game's version of dynamic difficulty scaling. Generally speaking, I think dynamic difficulty is put into games for two primary reasons: putting higher skilled players in check to prevent them from feeling bored by a challenge they're far beyond the level of, and to push lower skilled players past their comfort zone and give them a taste of what's just beyond their grasp. With a cynical view, you could make an argument that it's unfair to punish skillful play like this, but I don't think this is done out of malice. From my perspective, when a developer designs their game around scaling difficulty, they simply want to push their players a bit more each time they play and make sure they never desync with the natural difficulty curve of the game. In its best iterations, dynamic difficulty has worked so well at keeping players in the zone that they didn't even realize it was pulling the strings at all. Battle Garegga, conversely, feels outright antagonistic towards the player at basically every turn. Nearly every action in the game is enough to push the in-game rank just a little bit higher, and the only way to drop the rank is by dying. Don't get your hopes up that this is like Resident Evil 4 or God Hand either, where you can easily tank the difficulty through repeated failure to make an upcoming section easier if you felt like it. This is an arcade game after all, and its limited life system will quickly net you a game over if you try to drop your rank with rapid, thoughtless deaths. It sounds so simple, but applying this design idea to a shmup of all things can have massive ramifications on the game and seeps into every facet of play. There's no doubt in my mind that many people have and will continue to drop Battle Garegga simply due to the ranking system, and if they're just starting out, I don't think I'd blame them. In modern day with the benefit of hindsight, however, I think brushing this aside would be a huge mistake. As you can probably guess by now, Battle Garegga ignited a bit of a spark in me I haven't felt in a long time, but what is it about this exhausting cocktail of cruelty and creativity that does it for me? Well, to be honest, all of it. Improving at shmups already feels like an impossible task for most, so considering the game's severe initial difficulty, on top of the credit requirement for each run during the game's release, I can see why players would scoot over to a different cabinet after getting frustrated and confused at this one. Rank is the elephant in the room when it comes to discussing the game, and it really is the backbone of the whole experience. Nearly everything you do increases the rank, but what does this actually mean in the context of play? In the long term, it means every decision made can have unforeseen consequences later in a run, varying from faster and denser bullet patterns to endgame bosses having their HP doubled. On top of this, it also just makes short-term stretches of gameplay orders of magnitude more stressful. Take Stage 1 for example. Many shmups suffer from the first stage being a minute-long warm-up before you get to the real game, and can lead to resets being all the more exhausting when the biggest lump of gameplay happens right at the start. In Battle Garegga, however, there's so much shit to worry about and so many variables to consider that every fresh run feels like you're already starting at 100% mental capacity. I mentioned rigid routing in other shmups earlier, but here it's not so cut and dry. Depending on your ship, the items you go for might swing wildly, and every item you pick up is preceded by a massive question that lingers for your entire playthrough. How might this fuck me up later in the run? Looking at it on paper, it might not be a massive boon on your rank to pick up one extra shot upgrade or not, but beyond the consequences of prepping early for a stretch of the game you won't reach for another 4 stages, there's a blanket of anxiety that gets cast over a run from this that completely shifts the energy of the entire experience. For a mainstream comparison, I felt a similar ever-present pressure while playing through Resident Evil for the first time last year. Similar to controlling rank in Battle Garegga, every bullet fired and ink ribbon spent left me wondering just how much harder my final stretch through the mansion might be. While the structure of these two couldn't be any different, it can't be understated just how much of this anxiety is still retained when compressing this feeling into a 30-minute game compared to spreading it across a 4-hour one. Not only does this change how you view decisions you've already made, this has a really cool side effect on the physical space that items themselves take up before you even think about picking them up. While item drop locations are entirely deterministic, the shifting rank on top of your item drop order means you can rarely be quite sure of when and where specific items might spawn, and inadvertently turning surprise item drops into an extended piece of the enemy roster. Some pickups are good to collect at different points in the run, so every drop requires a quick and intelligent evaluation of whether it's something you should deal with or not. Options are probably the easiest example of this, being one of the most valuable upgrades you can earn for your ship, but adding more rank in one pickup than any other item in the game. While you could pick up a few extra options early to dramatically increase your DPS, you have to quickly decide whether or not this extra firepower is worth it in spite of the rather large immediate rank increase. Medals are the one slice of this pie that can feel a bit rigid on paper, essentially being an item you should disregard entirely if you drop a chain and reset their point value, but tied in with the rest of the items and the uncertainty of where they'll appear, they actually end up wrapping around and becoming one of my favorite things to follow in the game. While it's clear from the start that you always want to pick them up to keep a chain going and quickly work towards an extend, they have a nasty habit of dropping in the most repugnant places possible. It's all technically deterministic, like I said, but keeping track of every mechanic at once, on top of keeping a mental note of what enemies exactly will drop the item you want, is just too fucking much for most people to juggle, myself included. Normal enemy formations are already beautiful and layered in their construction and consideration for a distinct challenge, so tie that in with an item that can feel random in its placement, all while fighting enemies that can change the spread of their attacks from run to run based primarily on your rank, and you're always faced with fresh and unique obstacles to overcome, often when you're not ready for it. Depending on the speed of your ship, a bad item spawn can be absolutely catastrophic, so staying on your toes and being ready to squeeze through even the tightest of bullets to keep up your chain gives you a rush like no other. Shmups are generally defined by absurd handcrafted patterns to push through, so having a persistent piece of challenge that feels as dynamic and unpredictable as this is an absolute breath of fresh air for me. The final layer that really makes this system so fascinating to me is its relation to deaths and your failure state. Remember, death is the only action capable of dropping your rank, and hoarding lives for long stretches of time is a surefire way to end up with an experience far too hard to keep up with by the time you hit stage 5 and the rank really starts to bite you in the ass. Interestingly, this has led to strategies revolving around deliberate suicides to drop your rank before challenging sections you're getting extends, but even beyond high-level strategies, just giving the player extra room to bounce back from mistakes is a good enough motivator to push sloppy runs further than they may have tried before. Even in the worst of my runs, I constantly find myself saying stuff like, "At least my rank is a bit lower now," or "Shit, I better play well in the next stage to get that extra extend." It's the epitome of that dude leaning forward in the chair when things get serious, and it's always a surefire way to spike my adrenaline. Again, it's this dynamism that really sets the game apart not just from other shmups, but most games in general for me. Now, if you're familiar with the development of Battle Garegga, there's a chance you already know this, but here's the part where I have to rip off the band-aid and admit something. In an interview translated by Black Oak on the Shmuptacular forum in 2011, Shinobu Yagawa admitted of the ranking system that, "It sounds bad, but it was one of my methods for increasing income for arcade operators." While this may just seem like a damning condemnation of Yagawa and his team, like they just made the game as a Hyakuen muncher and it organically evolved into the mechanical mess that it is today, that would be ignoring the fact that everything surrounding rank is exceptionally well considered. I've already mentioned the enemy formations, but the level design itself is just absolutely perfect. Every stage has a central gimmick, set piece, or persistent element to consider that gives every stretch of the game a distinct identity and creatively blows up your rank for upcoming stages to inevitably screw over your run. I don't think there's a single stretch of gameplay I dislike, but my favorite might just be this massive 1-2-3 punch right around the middle of the game. In the middle of stage 3, you'll be faced with this mini-boss you have to tear apart piece by piece and keep alive for as long as possible to earn an extend at the end of its route, all while keeping track of massive fighter planes whose wings act as safe spots for the boss and as a home for many smaller enemies. Stage 4 has you focus more on the environment than anything else, with dozens of medals that come from bombing almost all of its structures. While this is a great place to boost your score if you've kept up a chain for long enough, it inevitably skyrockets your rank and depletes you of your resources right before the next stage, on top of tempting you to spend that extend you just received in the previous level. And finally, the start of Stage 5, which introduces aircraft carriers that always drop 6 items no matter what, with the likes of which being tied to your item drop order. This may seem predictable on paper, and you generally have a good idea of what types of items might drop, but the rotating pool of items and the order in which you break the carrier apart means every new ship is a new puzzle you have to solve on the fly. Again, an element that's entirely deterministic, but never presents itself to you in the same way every time. As an addendum to my old point on items as dynamic obstacles, this stage and set of enemies is maybe the best example of this. They're by far the easiest enemies to fight in the game, but the core of each platform being an obstacle course of items to weave through to either avoid extraneous rank increases or to keep up your chain when a medal spawns is one of the most breathtaking pieces of design I've ever seen in an arcade game. There's no doubt in my mind Yagawa and the team at Raizing did not envision the modern version of how Battle Garegga would be played, but you don't just accidentally design and map out a game as thoughtfully as this. Somehow there isn't a single stage in the lineup that feels out of place. All of them contribute to the structure in really interesting ways. I especially enjoy how even the game's pacing keeps you on your toes, featuring 4 quick stages to prep for the back end of the game, an endurance test of a boss rush taking place over the longest stage in the game, and 2 final stages that, while pretty standard as far as structure go, act as your final test of the game's mechanics quite well, I find. Initially I wasn't sure how to feel about the final third shifting focus away from rank control and set pieces, but being the section that most clearly shows the ramifications of your choices throughout the game, as well as being the one stretch that's even like this, I think it ends up slotting into the lineup quite well. Somehow, despite being crammed full of overlapping ideas and off-the-wall mechanics that always have new shit to discover, everything fits into place and adds to the game meaningfully. Even innocuous things like dying to drop the rank has a weird amount of thought put into it, with the number of lives you have when dying determining how much your rank will drop, meaning it's always better to suicide before getting an extend and not after. It's really brilliant shit. What I've come to learn over the years of getting into games from before my time is that first impressions might fool you and may inevitably push you away from something you'll truly fall in love with. We're always told not to judge books by their covers, but even beyond that, I think shaking away preconceptions of art can lead us to find new ways of appreciating even something as overtly laced with cynicism and cruelty as they come. Maybe the persistent stress and indecision felt during play is why Battle Garegga isn't for everyone, but I just can't get enough of it. Even though I'm far below the level where I can capitalize on every millisecond of play to maximize my score, I constantly find myself pulling back to appreciate this impossibly complex web of interwoven mechanics and ogle at the ways players have broken the game in half and bent it to their will. The fact that the game is over 25 years old and players are still pushing the limits of what's possible in it is awe-inspiring. This perfect combination of its unsolvability and difficulty of wrangling with its mechanics, combined with its loose enough structure to allow for players to truly stretch their legs and express themselves, is a perfect microcosm of why I fell in love with video games to begin with. Taking off my rose-tinted glasses for a minute, it's extremely clear that the era of arcades from the 80s and 90s didn't always have a clean experience for the player in mind. It's why games were tough as nails in their original pay-to-play format, and it's why a massive stretch of early console games felt like they carried over some old bad habits from their predecessors. Income was always a driving factor to their design, and pretending that that wasn't the case would be extremely disingenuous of me. Looking beyond that, however, is the key to finding what made these games stick with people back then and continue to pull them in now. If we all cast aside our rigid understanding and discussion of certain game design concepts, I think we'd all collectively find more games to fall in love with and appreciate. Maybe we'd find more games that have an exciting platter of stuff to dig into that was truly there all along, just hiding under our noses waiting to be discovered. Maybe we'd find more games like Battle Garegga.
Power up!